All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back in another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's interviewed where I am interviewing actually serving reservist about their career. Okay, so we're gonna be able to talk about balancing professional life, reserve life, but generally speaking, this is the show for you if you are trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do once I can put my hands back in my pockets, grow out my hair, and start wearing these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. Okay, so my job is to talk to people. Who either maybe still in active duty, still in the reserves, or who've transitioned out of the military 15 years ago to show you what are the options that are available for you and your family after military service, and give you access to tools, tactics, and frameworks that you can use to have successful post-military life or continue to serve in the reserves or even on active duty. So, Caleb, if you can take a minute, introduce yourself, man, I'd appreciate it.
Hey, yeah, my name's Caleb Naysmith. I'm a reservist in the United States Army. I'm currently a finance officer. I was previously enlisted and I did civil affairs then. I'm finishing up my time here at the University of Kentucky Law School, and I am currently essentially the head of startup news division for Benzinga.
Super cool, super cool. We'll go big blue. I think as we maybe first talked about at some point, my dad's family is from Kentucky, so like I grew up rooting for Kentucky basketball.
Mhm.
Um, Fun town, fun school. And then also good to find another CA person on here too. There's not many of us out there in the wild, so I think you might be my first. No, excuse me, I've had one more on here. Um, but yeah, not a whole lot of CA guests, so kind of fun for me to find other people from the regiment. That's always cool. Well, awesome, man. So I think I first found you out there on the interwebs. Um, there's a for those of you who don't know, there's a news blog site called Medium. Okay. And basically anyone can go on there and you can just write and then basically you can post your writing. And the basic idea of it is like, as more people read your writing, you get paid. All right. Now, I don't like, you might be hearing this already and be like, oh my God, I just got to go write this article and I'm become a millionaire. Like that, trust me, that is not how Medium works. Um, you could have like 1,000 people look at it and you might make like 7 cents or something like that on it. But it's a pretty good way to kind of like get your foot in the door in writing. That's actually literally how I got my start was, as I was making my transition from the army, I started writing about stuff on Medium. I had like written enough articles and like no one on Medium is reading stuff about the military. So no one was reading my stuff, but then I turned it into a blog and then the blog turned into this podcast and everything. So Caleb, I'm like first interested maybe how you got started in writing on there. And for context for everyone else, he's got like a very cool story and how this kind of then transitioned into like a job offer and a career for him, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I actually just thought it was. I originally kind of thought of the idea, and then I essentially searched Google to see if anything was like a way to do that. Like, is there a way? What is an easy way to essentially start a blog, or like, is there a way for me to kind of publish that stuff? Just because I thought it was interesting, and um, going into law school, which is about the time that I started writing on Medium, I knew that it would be good to kind of practice writing, and I looked into it. I eventually found Medium, and it looked like a pretty cool thing, and it ended up being really cool. So I've been writing on there, and now transitioning over to Benzinga for about almost 3 years, or almost a little, I think about 2 years now, I think, something like that. And yeah, I initially thought about writing about some of the stuff as it relates to law school, but ended up going to where I am now and writing about startups and equity crowdfunding. Because about the same time, I actually discovered startups and equity crowdfunding, and I had the business background and the legal background from being in law school in my undergrad, and so I caught on to the equity crowdfunding and what it meant and what it was really quick, and started writing about it. And I thought it was super interesting, and I just kind of kept writing about it. And kind of similar to what Mark was saying, where there wasn't anybody writing about this at the time, and so it was pretty easy to gain a following. And then I started making some groups around it, and it really blew up. And then I um, actually made my own site similar to what Mark did, and then from there that even blew up even more to my Benzinga job offer.
Super cool, super cool. And so we're gonna get into like a lot of the details because I was like a big picture overview and everything. But yeah, like I first found you. I've done some equity crowdfunding myself. Like it's just kind of one. It's just kind of fun to look at businesses. I don't Giant disclaimer for everyone on the show: this is not financial investing advice. I am not a professional investor or advisor. Do not listen to anything that I say or act accordingly based off of what I am doing, because I'm not an expert. And if you saw my finance grades from business school, you would attest to that. Okay. Uh, but I have, like, looked at equity crowdfunding. I've looked at, like, raising funding on equity crowdfunding platforms myself. And I don't think I found like anyone else out there who, and I've not done like a giant deep dive on the internet on this, but I haven't found really anybody else out there who does this kind of niche writing, right? So like it popped up on my feed. You wrote something about equity crowdfunding. I was like, oh, cool. That's something I want to read about. And then I was like, oh shit, this guy's in the army. I should reach out to him. And then like that's how we connected. So like, how did you, I guess, like first enter into? Okay, actually, let me back up. My coffee's kicking in right now. Can we first go over like what equity crowdfunding is, and then we can dive into maybe how you got started writing on that?
Yeah, so the equity crowdfunding is an industry created by the Jobs Act of 2015, which went into effect in 2016, that allows anybody to invest in startups. Realistically, what it is a securities exemption, so that these companies can register to get this exemption, and then that allows anyone who is, including non-accredited investors, to invest in startups up to certain limitations. So, um, if you make more money, they allow. So investing in startups is really risky, and so that's something definitely to consider. And that's something the SEC takes into account. So there's certain limits based on how much you make. If you make over a certain amount, then there's the limit goes away, similar to accredited investors and so on. But at its core, it's basically just a way to allow anybody to invest in startups. And I really like it because it's just a really, first of all, prior to 2016, when the law went into effect, it was not legal. Like there was no way to really do it unless you were starting up a business yourself or you were rich. And so, if you look at historical returns of VCs, they do incredibly well. They average something like 20% a year. And if you get these like big high profile exits, you can, you make substantial gains, as well as it kind of gives you a way to support businesses or ideas that you like. If you like green tech, that, like solar energy, if you like people that are making businesses out of one company that's doing really well that I liked and invested in, it's called like SoulGuard, and they take ocean trash and they make products out of it, like suitcases and little mini stereos and all kinds of cool stuff. So you can kind of find these things that you like and you think are interesting, and then invest in them, or if you're on the money side, you can try to make money off of it.
Right, right. I will push back on just one small thing on, because I took some classes on venture capital, and like generally speaking, venture generally speaking doesn't really do as well compared to like the S&P 500. It's like it's very much carried by like the small percentage at the
Yeah.
top. It's like the 20% of firms are getting like 80%, and then pretty much everyone else is like barely even beating like the S&P 500. But if and usually there's larger firms also, like you've got to have millions and millions and millions of dollars to be able to get into those. But if you do get into those, and like, yeah, those firms generally are crushing it over the long term and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I kind of found my way into equity crowdfunding the same way. It's just kind of like fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's any smart CPA or anything will tell anyone before they're getting into angel investing, like, when you write this check, be ready to never see this money again. Okay.
100%.
And
100%.
yeah, yeah. And I will tell you, like, I've made some equity crowdfunding raise that, I put money in and it's gone to zero. Okay. But then I've also, I've made an exit. And like when you make an exit on a startup, like you get a pretty high multiple. So the way I've looked at it, and like my personal investing is, overall, I'm still going the like boring index funds, like my TSP and all that kind of stuff. This is like 20% of what I do. Kind of with the idea too, also of like, I'm still in my 30s. And so I think, part of my risk profile is like, you got to make some swings for the fences if you like really want to get some big, gains over the long term. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And then that is very true. That's just what it could be. Obviously, there's tons and tons of people that try
Right.
it and fail, and it's definitely something to consider when you do write these checks. That is, generally how you should look at it is, I'm not going to see this money again. And then when you do, you're surprised, just because again, it's really, really risky. And it should, like you said, it's a diversification option, not it's something to consider, and it is a swing for the fences essentially. But it does, again, there's always in the back of my mind is, if it does go well, it can be something really good. It's just something to consider and kind of look at where you're at. But it's something I found to be really interesting and really cool. And obviously I've kind of been really into the space as, I've written about it, and this whole following has grown, and talking with people about it and so on. So
Yeah. And for those of you listening right now, I want to be clear in that like there's some platforms, there's a couple of different platforms out there. And they're all, pretty, I've used a couple of them. They're very user friendly. It's like very easy to figure out how to do it and everything. They make it very intuitive. And on some of these platforms, you can invest for as little, I think maybe one is as little as $10, but generally speaking, probably like 100 to 250 or so.
Mhm.
So you don't have to be ready, to take out a second mortgage to make one of these payments or something, right? Like you can do it as little as like a couple $100 if you want. Okay. Which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and there is some where there's like, I know Start Engine has collectibles where some of those are literally like $10. Oh, okay, there's my cat.
That's funny. I didn't even know you actually had a cat. That's perfect.
No, I do. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
You're
Um,
good. You're good.
and but yeah, you can invest in some of these for as little as like $10. The average is probably 100 to 250. On the higher side, it's 500, but usually doesn't go above that. And so it is something where you can literally invest very little, and it's again, like you said, you don't have to take out a second mortgage um, to invest in these startups. So and it's one of those things where based on what your portfolio size is, that's an option. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So like what did your first foray into like writing in this world look like? Like what kind of topics were you exploring? Were you just kind of like, yeah, like what are the kind of like the first moves look like for you?
Yeah, so the first company I found was, I think, Seed Invest, but they only had a few offerings at the time, and then I was like wondering what else there was out there, and I discovered Start Engine, and actually Start Engine had just launched on Start Engine Secondary, which is their secondary trading platform, kind of like a mini stock market for startups at the time, and um, I looked at that, and I was, again, this was just me discovering the industry like right then. So I saw their stock price, and I saw that obviously this is a portal that's on this secondary platform, and so I was kind of looking into it, and I thought that would be a pretty cool first investment. So um, their stock price was really low at the time, almost as low as their first raise that they um, I think it was like $8, and at that time the valuation was something like 3 or 4 times their revenue that I thought they were going to do for that year. So I thought it'd be like a really, really good investment at the time. So I bought a whole bunch of it. Like I say a whole bunch. I bought. Now I have about 1,250 shares, which at the time was like 2 or 3 grand. And then since then they did like a share split, and it's kind of really exploded. And then going into that, it kind of gave me a confidence boost to kind of really go more into this. And my first writing was just about companies I thought were interesting, and some of the stuff I was learning about, and maybe some very basic stuff. And like, I think my very first article was actually about a company called Graze, and they make electric self-driving lawnmowers. I just thought that was really cool because it was at the same time Tesla was just blowing up. So, and a lot of people that actually did really well, and a few other, and then it just kind of went from there.
Super cool. Yeah. Yeah. I remember seeing Grays. I think it was on Seed Invest. I thought it was a super cool company. Um, okay. That talk a little bit about, because you had a super cool story of how like you turned this just kind of like hobby thing, you're writing stuff on Medium, and then this turned into a job for you, which like totally came out of left field. Can you talk through of like how that process came about for you? 'Cause it's a super great story.
Yeah. So again, I started writing in Medium about 2 years ago, and it was just kind of a hobby at that time. I maybe did an article a week. I started looking in, and it started going well almost immediately because nobody else was really writing about this stuff. So when you write about it, then it goes on Google, and then anybody who's looking for grades, nobody else was writing about this, so they would immediately see your writing, and it took off pretty quick. I made like a Facebook group, which is now at about 3,500 members or so, and that started growing pretty quick. Um, and so as I just kept writing and writing, following just kept growing. And then if, the thing about Medium is they only pay you if people read your stuff that also pay the $5 a month on Medium. So like if somebody clicks and reads your story off Google and they're not a Medium member or they're not logged in, you don't get paid anything. And so it's kind of a weird um, it's a weird site because again, you can only make those, like even if it gets 100,000 views, if none of those are from Medium members, then you don't get paid anything. So I started looking at making my own blog, and after about a year, maybe more, maybe a little bit more than a year, I made my own blog, democratizing.finance, and I built it out from just a blog to a few other things, and slowly still working on that, or as I transition over Benzinga. It's not, I don't have to get rid of it, and I still have it there, but I'm kind of focused on the Benzinga side. But that was just another avenue of essentially driving, building this following, driving traffic, and writing and making these resources to be useful. Because again, even though again, there's just not a whole lot of people doing anything in this site, so there wasn't a whole lot of investor education. There wasn't a lot of writing. There wasn't a lot of content in YouTube and so on. So it was pretty easy to quickly build up my following in that space. And it people started reaching out like a lot. Founders would reach out and say, hey, here's my company, or do you want to talk and post a video on YouTube, or do you want to write about my company and so on. And so I made a lot of connections pretty quick. I know a lot of people. I know Johnny, who's the VP of WeFunder, and I've talked to Howard Marks, who's the CEO of Start Engine, and I've talked with lots of founders and advertising agencies in the space, and it's really just kind of blew up. And interestingly enough, I've gotten some like smaller like jobs from it, not necessarily like what I'm doing right now with Benzinga, but when Benzinga came along, it was kind of interesting because it was like a pretty substantial offer, and right now it's still going really well, where I'm essentially doing that, or that's a potential full-time job, and I'm working into kind of going into that role. But essentially they're building out an alt investments alt investments news vertical, which means that they didn't really have that. They're kind of building this up, and they were looking for people that write about this in the space, because just anybody, I think they tried a couple people before me and they didn't really work out too well. And so they found my writing, and interestingly enough, so they found my website, democratizing.finance. They took one of my articles and then kind of pretty much reposted it. They obviously revamped it, but it was like an older story, and it was something that nobody else would have published, but they published it like a week after mine. So it was pretty obvious that they did that, and then they did it again. And so this was like 2 articles where they're doing this,
Right.
and I kind of, in a cheeky way, took those articles, found a job posting for Benzinga as like an editor or something, and the only thing I did to submit this job offer was I put in the resume thing. I didn't put in anything else. I put in my 2 articles and the 2 articles they copied and hit submit. And literally a week later, they were like, hey, we're doing this. Do you want a job? And I was like, I thought it was hilarious, dude. I mean, I told my dad, and he was cracking up, and I couldn't believe this, just because I didn't expect to even hear back from them. It was mostly just a, cheeky thing to do. And then they were like pretty serious about it. And we went through negotiations for about 2 weeks as to what this would look like, and how much I would make and so on. And it ended up being actually really, really good, a really great offer. And I'm actually pretty happy there now. So yeah,
the lesson that I kind of want the audience to take away from your story is, generally speaking, I think like the world thinks that there's always like a straight path into getting into something. And I think probably those of us who spent time in the military are probably even more inclined to think that way, just because it's a very hierarchical organization. You're like, I have to be a platoon leader before I'm an XO. I have to be an XO before I'm a company commander. I have to be a squad leader before I'm a platoon sergeant. Like that's how we're like inculcated in thinking, right? But there's always like a third way. There's always like a back door side entrance where you tip off the bouncer and you can find your way into the club way easier, right? And like that's what you did. you were like, hey, listen, like you weren't even doing it trying to get a job. Like it sounded more like you were doing it really just to kind of be funny, which I totally respect and love. First of all, uh, but then it was like, you know, I like, was anywhere in the back of your mind thinking like, yeah, you know what? Maybe they're gonna wanna like maybe they'll see this and like want to talk to me, or were you totally just like, dude, screw you guys, you're just copy and pasting my shit?
I mean, on the back of my mind, I was looking at essentially what their like editor salaries are and whatever, and I was like, I mean, I mean, I wouldn't not take the job. So, um, once I submitted it, like I didn't think I was going to get the job, but I thought that if like they're already reading my stuff, and I knew that, and I again, like if I was offered it, essentially, I obviously was offered it, and I took it, and so on. It was kind of in the back of my mind, but at the same time, I did never in 1,000 years would I actually think that they would see that it's obviously kind of a cheeky, like, and then actually offer me a job. A part of me thought, the exact opposite, where it's like I'm totally gonna like make an enemy here, and then they're gonna just keep copying my stuff and try to run me out of business and or whatever. But that's not what happened. But um, it through the writing, some other stuff, it's made me enough connections where this started out as a hobby, and then I made enough connections where I would either do like side jobs for people or help people out, and eventually I kind of thought like, hey, this would be a really cool industry to work in, and I anytime something like that came up, I would actually like reach out to them and kind of, see if there's a working relationship there, either now or later, or like, hey, keep me in mind. Um, and I still have people that I kind of like work with on the side and talk with, and if this doesn't work out, I could probably find another job and so on. But um, it's probably been about 10 times easier to get a job in the equity crowdfunding world just from kind of this basis that I've built in writing and this website and so on. Then, for example, I'm a law school student, so I have to apply to or I was applying to lots of like jobs at law firms, and I could apply to 10 law firms with like personalized um, cover letters and not even hear back from 9 of them, and then 10 of them may or may not even give me a call back to say, hey, you're not getting the job. Whereas now it's like people are reaching out to me to if they want to hire me, and I don't even have to like do anything, or if I do, it's some cheeky like whatever. So
What
uh,
I was just having another conversation with someone about this recently. Of it, at some point, when anybody just like you just kind of put yourself in the field, and like you're gonna get like think of like a sports field. Okay, like you got to put some shots on goal. You're gonna miss at some point. Like you're gonna get hit sideways. The ball is gonna hit you on the side of the face when you don't see it come in, right? But if you don't put yourself on the field, then like you're never gonna give yourself a chance to make a play and eventually score, right?
mm,
And like you just going on to Medium and writing something was like just getting into the field. And
mm,
it was a while of kind of grinding and just writing and just like getting shots of goal and like making some singles here and there. And then eventually someone sees, keep along my sports analogy here, like, hey, this kid's got a great throwing arm. I think he's got a lot of potential. Like we'll work on the footwork a little bit, but like I think he's got something there.
mm,
um, but like you got to get out in the field, right? And I think too often we all want to just like sit on the bench and like watch other people do it, or think that like we can't go up to the coach and say put us in. I'm like really leaning in on the sports analogy right now, but like you've got to do it. And if you want to do something, like you can't be afraid of just like putting yourself out there a little bit.
mm,
And what I'll also say too, people ask me this all the time related to content, as like a person who has a blog and a podcast and everything. They're like so nervous about publishing that first thing. And what I always tell people is like, dude, no one's going to read it. Like, no one's going to see it. No one's going to listen to it. Like, just, it's fine. Like, you're going to screw it up. It's not going to be great. Like, you're going to, have some grammar mistakes, or there's going to be, some wonky audio or whatever, but it's going to be fine and you're going to get better. So, like, don't be, like, I'm embarrassed of my first couple of podcasts. Like, please don't anyone go back and listen to them. They're okay. They're raw at this point. Okay. But I've gotten a lot better. All right. And at some point, like you just got to go and like, don't be afraid to, put your ass out in the wind a little bit.
Yep, I love that. I so prior to this job offer and prior to getting where I was, over the course of about 2 years, I published about 300 stories to get to
Yeah.
this point.
That's a
So
lot.
yeah, that's that's usually several a week. So this wasn't like I definitely like I'd like to say that I put in the work and I really leaned into this thing. So it's definitely there's definitely that aspect of it. Like you kind of said, you got to put yourself out there, and my earliest stories were just awful, and I would go back and I would read them and I'd be like, I cannot believe like this is just the worst. And I would often actually go back and spend time editing those just in case somebody would actually go back and try to um, read them because they are out there. Eventually, people would go back and read my old stories and whatever, and I'm just like these suck, you know. And so and that's just part of it though. It's like the good thing about that is you can look at where you are now and be like, wow, this actually is pretty good, like 100 times better than what it was. Um, and but you're improving, and that's kind of why it attracted um, the audiences that it did, is because people eventually thought it was really good, and I kind of tried all these different things and saw what worked, and that was just kind of kind of how it was where it was. But there was definitely a beginning. It was definitely rough. Nobody read it. I questioned whether this was even worth my time because once you get 50 stories and you're getting like if you have 50 stories that you spent a good amount of time on, and you're getting like 1,000 people reading it a month, it's like but now it's like several multiples of that, and it's one of those things where you just kind of got to do it and stick with it, and find something that you're passionate about so that it's not, even if you suck at it and even if nobody reads it, you're still doing something that you enjoy.
Right. Well, here's the big question that probably some people are wondering themselves right now. Like, are you going to go into law, or is like this going to be your thing, or is this, yeah, like I mean, you're still in law school, so like what does the future look like for you?
That's a great question that so honestly, this thing that I have going right now, I would love to do. Fun fact, I'm actually deploying to Kuwait here in next November. So I will finish up law school, probably take the bar just because it's 7 years in the making at this point. And,
Right.
um, I don't want to go all this way just to not do it, but I really like what I'm doing right now. And, um, it'll be one of those things where we'll just kind of have to play it by ear. If, for example, the Benzinga thing works out all the way up until I deploy, and then they're willing to work with me through that, and I can come back and keep doing that, I'd love to do that. If not, then I can, you know, I'll probably look at the, working for law firms and so on. But the deployment thing is kind of the X factor or so on. I
Right.
don't know how it'll go, and whenever I come back, in a perfect world, I really like what I'm doing, and I think there's tons of long term potential because they've given me a lot of leeway in what I'm doing. I'm pretty much just doing. I'm writing what I was doing before, essentially news for Benzinga about startups, and I get to work with a lot of the big players in the space. I get to pretty much do whatever I want. I mean, to put it I have a lot of autonomy in my job, and so I really like it. But we'll just kind of have to see and play it by ear. It's definitely a big turning point. If nothing else, my family actually just we're working on buying a whole bunch, 200 something acres up in we're from East Tennessee, so we're kind of building that out, and maybe that we're gonna log that and some other stuff. So it's
Heck yeah.
we got transitional work, we got potentially long term stuff if it works out, and we got backup plans. That's one of my big things is like I don't ever want to be just kind of like left in the dust of like I always want something to fall back on because
Right.
so I kind of have all these different irons in the fire, but I have my current plan and then kind of things to fall back on, and that's kind of what my philosophy on it all.
I think that's smart. I think that's smart. Well, hey man, this is we're kind of winding down to the last few minutes here. I think but this has been awesome. It was super fun to connect with you in the first place. I
Mm,
think your story has got a lot of good lessons for this audience of thinking about not having to follow the script, right?
mm.
Even I know there's a lot of people who might be listening to this who are even thinking of going to law school, and like they're hearing someone who's like, dude, you're in law school and you're just like going to go not be a lawyer potentially. Like you can do that, okay? And so like give yourself permission to go an alternate path from everybody else. Like if everyone else is zigging, like you might be able to zag and get away with it, okay? Um, so Caleb, I really appreciate your time today. And so in a minute, I'm going to pass it over to you if you're going to just kind of like, parting shots, last words of wisdom. But before I do, it's a question I always ask my guests. And that's if you think, around your time in the Army, what's been the best and or worst chow hall you've ever been to?
I can answer the worst because I was just there, and it was Fort Dix, New Jersey, and it was just like we would not the Air Force side, obviously, but
Obviously not.
yeah, obviously, but there was like the one we went to. I went there for AT every day at breakfast. I did not get a single day where my eggs were not just liquid, like so
Oh,
runny. Like even if you got an omelet, they would cook it for maybe a few seconds, and so you're getting like an undercooked runny omelet with not even cooked vegetables or whatever you put on it. And I mean, it was just awful. I mean, oh my gosh, it was like like I would usually just walk. It was like a mile to the like all the food stuff and some other like the food area and the grocery store, the
right.
PX and all that. And so I would usually just walk to that half the time and then spend most of the spend like the evening once I'm off or whatever there and just eat there because it was brutal. The best that would be um I honestly don't think the let me think. Hmm. I don't know. The rest of them have been pretty, I guess, standard. I think maybe Fort Bragg. I went to AIT from being civil affairs at Fort Bragg there. JFK Special Warfare Center in school. Like that was pretty decent.
That one's come up a few times, I think, actually. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah. That's pretty good one. Pretty good one. Well, awesome, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time. Just want to pass it back over you for any parting shots, words of wisdom you want to give out before you officially end the show.
yeah, I think the big thing as far as like my path is, it's definitely unconventional and it's also just kind of like it's a lot about making it happen, I guess, and like, doing something like I don't know, every time whenever I go and work for, I've worked for law firms or, in courts and so on that I've just hated and I've been to others that I've loved. And, I think a big thing is one, kind of finding something you enjoy and really sticking with it and making it happen. And like, similar to what you said, where you started your blog and nobody else was really doing it. And, it's something you're really passionate about. But, there's a lot of, you know, again, there's a lot of unconventional ways to kind of get your foot in the door because a lot of times, people, like, I don't know, a lot of people just don't, I don't know, the world's kind of about connections in a lot of ways. And it, when you go to somebody um, and you don't know them, and so they're taking a risk, but so it can be kind of difficult to get your foot in the door in a lot of ways. So a lot of times it's about making your own door. There's not I have to get a job in this space, otherwise, I'll never be able to work in this space. You can figure out what is this space and kind of figure out your own way, whether that's um, kind of what we're doing, where it's making your own website and kind of building that out, because you can start a website for a couple $100 usually, and that'll get you about a year of the website, and it's something you can try and just, it's about, putting yourself out there and kind of making your own door, but kind of taking a realistic look at the where you want to be and kind of figuring out the actual steps and goals to get there, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
I think your story, Mark, is really awesome. And I think, I think seeing how you've done a very similar path, and I think that's showing that a lot of people can kind of make their own path is really important. But yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
There's definite wisdom in figuring out, one, like being comfortable in, if we think of like an analogy of a hallway here, I'm just loving analogies on the show today. You think of like an analogy of like a hallway where there's like a bunch of doors, right? Like you're never going to know what's beyond the door unless you just like open it up and like,
mm,
even if it's just a peek for a little bit and see, oh, hey, there's no whole other hallway down here with a bunch of other doors. So one, like, don't be afraid to just peek through the door a little bit. And then also don't be afraid to just, step in there and see what happens. Okay.
mm.
Well, hey, I really appreciate your time today, Caleb. For everyone still listening, please like, subscribe, leave a review. And if you're still planning your exit from the military, please go to vetjourney.com. Well, hey, Caleb, appreciate your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. All right.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much,
All
Mark.
right. Take care, man.